Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. It is Dongle. Today will be the start of a new series I would like to call Dongle Talks. It's basically just going to be a series where I talk about certain topics that I am passionate about, or just random things I feel like talking about. Today's topic will be the presidency of Ronald Reagan, who in my opinion is one of, if not the worst president of the United States. And many people will fight me on this point, but I have the facts and research to back it up. So without further ado, let's jump right in, and we'll explain to you why Ronald Reagan is my least favorite president. Alright, so today we're diving into the complex legacy of Ronald Reagan, a figure often remembered fondly in American history. Many people look back on the presidency and time period with nostalgia for several reasons. Reagan was a charismatic person and had an effective communication with the American people. It earned him the nickname of the Great Communicator. His optimistic vision of America resonated with many, especially during a time when the country was recovering from economic struggles and the lingering effects of the Vietnam War. Reagan was also credited with spurring economic growth and reducing inflation, leading to a period of prosperity known as the Reagan Boom. His strong stance against the Soviet Union and the symbolic call to tear down this wall during the Cold War also bolstered his image as a decisive leader. However, if we look deeper, Reagan's presidency is a story full of corruption and deception. From controversial policies that widen the gap between the rich and poor, to hidden scandals like the Iran-Contra affair. There's much more to this administration than meets the eye. So, join me today as we uncover the darker side of this presidency, and I will explain why his legacy may not be as great as it's often remembered. Alright, let's get started. Before we can dive into the presidency of Ronald Reagan, we have to take a look at his early career. Obviously, many people know the story, famous Hollywood actor turned into President of the United States. One thing that's often not talked about is his tenure as governor in California from 1967 to 1975. During this period, Reagan laid the groundwork for many of the policies that would later define his presidency. His tenure as governor was marked by a direct assault on black communities, particularly in his efforts to suppress civil rights activism and dismantle social programs. Shocker. One of Reagan's most infamous acts as a governor was his opposition to the Black Panther Party. This was a revolutionary organization that sought to combat police brutality and provide community services in black neighborhoods. Sound like upstanding citizens that want to protect their community. Ronald Reagan didn't think so. He actively encouraged police brutality against these people and supported the FBI's COINTELPRO operation, which stands for Counterintelligence Program. Basically, what this program did was send FBI spies into certain political groups that they deemed too radical for America and sought to lay distrust and uneasiness within the program and revolution to try and get it to dismantle. This ultimately was successful with the Black Panther Party because it dismantled soon after. Additionally, after all of this, Reagan championed policies that disproportionately harmed black and low-income communities, including cuts to welfare programs and public education, etc. His hostility toward the Fair Housing Act further exacerbated racial segregation in California, ensuring that black families remained confined to impoverished neighborhoods. With limited economic opportunities, these early actions foreshadowed the devastating impact his policies would later have on black communities during his presidency. Foreshadowing indeed, because that leads us to our next topic in the video, Reaganomics. Alright, now that Ronald Reagan's tenure as California governor was up in 1975, he decided he would further his political career by making a run to become the 40th president of the United States. He obviously won, because people liked Reagan, thought he was charismatic, I listed all the reasons earlier why people liked him and voted for him. Anyways, as soon as Reagan was in office, he instated one of the most enduring economic policies of all time, under the name Reaganomics, or also known as trickle-down economics. It's very popular in the United States, but the problem with it is that it absolutely sucks and is horrible, except for the ultra-wealthy, because it prioritizes tax cuts for the wealthy and large corporations, under the premise that the benefits would trickle down to the working class. However, in practice, that's not how it works, because nothing trickles down, and the rich people and large corporations just get tax cuts. So it sounds pretty familiar to what's happening in modern society, and yeah, that's basically what's happening in today's world, and there's nothing we can do about it. Anyways, Reaganomics led to extreme wealth inequality, obviously, the stagnation of wages, and dismantling of social safety nets, which is something we already knew Ronald Reagan liked to do, as his tenure in California showed us that he does not like social programs at all. He cut funding drastically to all social programs that provided crucial assistance to low-income families. So programs such as food stamps, Medicaid, and school lunch programs saw major reductions under Reaganomics, leaving millions of vulnerable Americans without basic necessities. His administration justified these cuts by painting welfare recipients as lazy and undeserving. We'll come back to that later. They're stigmatizing poverty and economic hardship. The funding of school lunch programs in particular meant that countless children from low-income families went hungry, while corporations and the wealthy just sit back and enjoy their tax breaks while not giving back anything to the lower class. So earlier I was saying he deemed welfare participants as undeserving and lazy. I want to bring a point that this is very similar to what's happening today. Elon Musk is very well known as he is taking a big part in the current Trump administration. Well, Elon Musk on record has stated that anybody that uses welfare and anything like that is known as the parasite class. Like dehumanizing them and stigmatizing them even more. And it's just awful to see. And it's all because it started with Reaganomics. Reaganomics has just had a cascade of effects throughout American history, and nothing has been done about it whatsoever, and it's really disappointing. In my opinion, this is like the biggest point of contention with Ronald Reagan. He wouldn't have been as bad of a president in my eyes if it wasn't for his economic policies. And I'm not even done explaining everything I hate about him, but this is like my biggest standing point on him. He's like irredeemable in my eyes because of his Reaganomics policy, and he has just ruined so many people's lives because he thought that people that needed economic assistance were undeserving. Well, I want you to know, Ronald Reagan, that you are a piece of shit, and no one is undeserving of having their basic human needs met. Anyways, tangent aside, let's go to the next part of the video. Alright, Ronald Reagan is now the president. Reaganomics is all over the country. The wealth gap is big. Social programs have been cut. What does he do next for the American people? What can he do to redeem himself? Nothing, because he just made things worse for people. He did this by being a huge part in the drug trade. If you did not know, in the 1980s, the US government, through the CIA, secretly facilitated the smuggling of cocaine into the country to fund Nicaraguan Contra rebels. The Contras were fighting against the Sandinista government, who was communist at the time. So, because of the time period, we're at the height of the Cold War. America is just balls deep in that shit, you know? Like, they hate communism, especially Ronald Reagan. He had, like, massive, just no communism policy, you know? He hated Gorbachev. So, what does he do? He tries to stop the spread of communism at any cost, even if it means funding drug lords that were accused of many human rights violations and war crimes. So, for example, you know, child soldiers, torturing people, you know, obviously the drug trade. Reagan was just okay with this and let it flow freely into America, and especially black neighborhoods where he loved to plant it, you know, just make their lives even harder after he cut their social programs. But now that the drugs were in America, Reagan realized there was a problem. They're like, where did all this crack come from? So, you know, there's an epidemic, you know. So Reagan, what he does is start vamping up the war on drugs that Richard Nixon had started. So, to do this, Reagan instated mandatory minimum sentencing. If you do not know what mandatory minimum sentencing is It is a policy that where there is a minimum amount of prison time per gram of crack. So, for instance, 5 grams of crack, minimum 5 years in prison. Judge can do absolutely nothing about that. That is final. You have 5 years in prison, no matter what. So, 10 grams, 10 years, 20 grams, 20 years, up to 40. Maximum of 40 years in prison for having crack. Pretty crazy to me, but, Reagan loved to throw people in prison. We'll get into that later. Anyways, police were given a lot of freedom at this time to do kind of whatever they wanted with people that had crack. For instance, you had a buddy that liked crack, he had 10 grams of crack on him and you wanted to hang out with him one day. Police, you're driving, police stop you, routine traffic stop. They find the 10 grams of crack on your buddy. Well, they were given the authority to split that crack up and arrest multiple people by association. So, they could give 5 grams of crack to you, 5 grams of crack to your buddy. Both of you go into prison for a minimum of 5 years. Bye-bye. Your life is ruined forever. You are now a federal drug offender. Yippee! Thanks, Reagan. So, Reagan really was big on ruining people's lives. He's kind of a bastard. And he would have gotten away with all this, and nobody would have known if it wasn't for Oliver North. Oliver North was a National Security Council aide who played a crucial role in coordinating the illegal arms sales and funneling of drug money to the Contras. He did this despite knowing the repercussions it would have on American communities all over the country. But he got out of his convictions due to coming forth during congressional hearings and testifying against Ronald Reagan and just putting out all the information he had. So good on him for coming forward and doing the right thing. But still, you allowed tons of crack and tons of people's lives to be ruined in the United States. So too little, too late, buddy. So now that we have all these people getting arrested for crack, what does Reagan do next? Well, he starts the boom of private prisons. The prison industrial complex becomes a thing. And that will be what our next section is about. Reaganomics and the war on drugs are in full effect at this point. Thanks to Reaganomics, this led to the expansion of the prison industrial complex. And thanks to the mandatory minimum sentencing laws, there was a ton of people coming into prison. So these two combined to create the massive prison industrial complex that we see today. See, the laws about mandatory minimums were not about crime. They were about control and profit. As I said before, the war on drugs was not a war against the drugs or the people bringing drugs into the country. It was about the people affected by drugs. Reagan wanted to profit off of their misfortune. This explosion of mass incarceration during his presidency fed directly into Reaganomics and the growth of private prison industry. During this time, the industry became a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Prisons became multi-billion-dollar enterprises by housing people that Reagan was putting in prison for crack that he was bringing into the country. Make it make sense. But there's a reason why he did this. Because thanks to Reaganomics, prison turned a profit, and free labor from prison became a cornerstone of US economics. And you guys think I'm lying about this, but if you read the 13th Amendment, you will know that I am not bullshitting. The 13th Amendment states that involuntary servitude it prohibits, except as a punishment for a crime. Therefore, you could use free labor or work on pennies to the dollar as a punishment for crime. Therefore, the private prison industry could make money off of these people that were incarcerated for an insane amount of time due to these mandatory minimum laws. And we still see the effects of this today. The United States has the highest incarceration rate in the entire world, and we only make up about 5% of the population. I think this is absolutely terrible and disgusting act as the president. We were supposed to be better than this and get past slavery, but we just found a loophole in the amendment that people passed years ago to find a way to get around it and basically create a new slave market by incarcerating people, predominantly black people, making their lives even harder than it already is in modern day America. And the problem with conservatives now is that they have absolutely no empathy or sympathy for any of these people because they are convinced that drugs are so bad. Because there's a huge stigma about this. Thanks to Ronald Reagan's careful campaigning in the war on drugs, targeting the people that were affected by these drugs and not the drugs directly and the people bringing the drugs into the country. This is absolutely unacceptable for a person running the United States of America, and a big reason as to why I absolutely despise Ronald Reagan. But this isn't even the worst. It gets better, and we'll go into that in our next section. Reagan's controversy doesn't end here, believe it or not. Anyways, we'll go on to the next section, explaining the Iran-Contra affair. That's right, Reagan got involved in another Contra. Well, Ronald Reagan just couldn't help himself for more controversy, and this one is almost the worst, in my opinion. But there's one thing that we'll get to later that is absolutely removes any irredeemable qualities from Ronald Reagan. But that's for the end of the video. I saved the best for last. Let's talk about the Iran-Contra affair. Earlier, we talked about the Nicaraguan Contra affair that was funneling drugs into the United States to fight the Sandinista government. Well, Reagan wanted to dip his hand into another Contra. The Iran-Contra affair was one of the most significant scandals of Reagan's presidency. His administration illegally sold arms to Iran, a country under an arms embargo, very illegal, in exchange for the release of American hostages held by Hezbollah. These proceeds from the arms sales were then funneled back into the Nicaraguan Contras in direct violation of the Boland Amendment, which prohibited U.S. assistance to the Contras. As you can see by now, Reagan has a long list of very unethical and illegal things that he did in office, in the name of fighting against communism and drugs, even though he was directly responsible for drugs being in the United States. You see how much of a hypocrite he is? How much of a two-faced liar he is? Well, it gets worse, because when the news of the scandal broke, Reagan addressed the American people and acted like nothing was wrong. He got on national television in 1986 and denied any involvement his administration had traded arms for hostages. Quote, "We did not, repeat, did not trade arms or weapons or anything else for hostages, nor will we." That's what he declared. However, subsequent investigations and leaked documents proved that this was a blatant lie. The Tower Commission reported, and congressional hearings revealed that Reagan had indeed approved the arms for hostages deal, further undermining public trust in his administration. His televised denial remains one of the most infamous examples of presidential deception in American history. There you have it, folks. Ronald Reagan exposed to the American people. Just absolutely exposed for being a two-faced, deceiving crime lord that ran the United States of America in the 1980s. Why do people like this guy so much? It makes absolutely zero sense to me. He lied to you. He made your lives worse. He could have put your family members in jail. He gave arms to the Iran-Contra. You want to know what the Iran-Contra did years later? Well, they turned around and attacked the United States multiple times. They blew up the bomb in the World Trade Center, the first attack on the World Trade Center. 2001, a little thing called 9/11, they were responsible for that. Reagan gave them money and weapons for hostages. Well, yeah, it's important to bring hostages home. It's also important not to arm religious radical groups that could turn around and betray us at any moment. Very bad decision in hindsight. But we'll get into that later, because there's theories that Reagan was not all there during his presidency. Well, now, it's time to talk about Reagan and his mental state. See, Reagan, in history, is one of the older presidents. Very similar to our last two presidents, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Well, as his presidency progressed, concerns about his mental state began to surface. Reports from former aides and White House staff suggested that Reagan often appeared confused, forgot key details, relied heavily on his advisors for decision-making. Some historians and political analysts believe that Reagan may have shown early signs of Alzheimer's while he was still in office, though the official diagnosis did not come until 1994, 5 years after he left the presidency. So, We had someone with the early stages of Alzheimer's running our country, making very important decisions. How is this okay? We had someone else other than the president running the country. He was just the face because he was charismatic. This is very funny to me because many people look back on Ronald Reagan and say that, oh, you know, he was old and he still ran the country with an iron fist. He fought communism. He gave us tax cuts. He did all this. The problem I have with that is that modern day Republicans, the conservative party, has bashed Joe Biden since day one he took office in 2020, questioning his mental state and whatnot. But they fail to see one of their most beloved and famed presidents and question his mental state and his decisions he made for the country during that time period. It's like they're completely oblivious to it, and they don't recognize the facts that if you're going to criticize one person, you should also criticize the person in the past and criticize the guy that's in the office right now because he's not doing so hot either. Maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't be having people that are older than a majority of the United States running the country, you know, like people that don't know what a credit card is, or, you know, they were there when sliced bread was invented, for God's sake. I don't know. I just think a little bit of common sense is that we should have someone that's up to date with the times and could, you know, take care of themselves. Tangent aside, Ronald Reagan had Alzheimer's or dementia or whatever and was allowed to just run the country and do whatever. Not a good look. Not a good look at all. And this leads me to the last section of our video. You see, Ronald Reagan, if it's true that his mental health and state was truly declining, this would explain what he did towards the end of his presidency and how he might have made one of the most fatal mistakes in all of United States history. And we'll get into that now. All right. Now this is the most fun part of the video for me because it is, you know, time to really tear into Ronald Reagan. This is the section about the worst of Ronald Reagan. All the other stuff, real bad. But this, unforgivable. So during Reagan's presidency, it was all marked by an aggressive military buildup. He escalated the Cold War tensions instead of trying to reduce them. He started this new initiative, the SDI initiative, which stands for Strategic Defense Initiative, nicknamed Star Wars. Reagan, at this point in time, wanted to weaponize space. He wanted to send satellites up into the outer space and equip them with things that would be able to disarm nuclear warheads and missiles before they could ever hit the United States. Be that lasers or other missiles. Who knows what was going on in this man's mind? Because clearly, they were onto something about the Alzheimer's theory. The most annoying part about this is that this is never brought up. Now, this is always something that's glossed over. You know, people never, ever question this, in my experience. I would say most people don't even know about it, which is odd, because it really shows that Ronald Reagan was cuckoo. But so, obviously, in the 80s, we were not capable of that. So, this led to an expensive and ultimately unrealistic defense missile system program that cost billions without producing viable results ever. He also had an unwillingness to fully commit to nuclear disarmament. That by the end of his presidency, the opportunity to eliminate nuclear weapons was lost. See, during the 1986 Reykjavik summit with Gorbachev, Reagan had the chance to negotiate a world free of nuclear weapons. Gorbachev, all he wanted him to do was stop his SDI project. He did not want the United States to try and weaponize space. And Gorbachev was fully prepared to sign the deal to disarm all nuclear weapons by 2001. Reagan was insistent on SDI, and talks broke down. So, here's the thing though. Gorbachev, as he was leaving with the president from the building where the Reykjavik summit was held, he gave the president one more chance. He said, "Mr. President, I'm fully prepared to turn around and sign this agreement if you step down and stop trying to weaponize space." You know what Reagan had to say in response to this? He said, "No, I'm sorry." Reagan had the opportunity to take the first steps to eliminating the atom bomb from the world, disarming all nukes by 2001. And he said no, because he would rather shoot them down with missiles in the sky because that's cooler, and hell yeah, America! No, in reality, Reagan was he had Alzheimer's. He was unhinged. Probably didn't even know where he was. So, Ronald Reagan said no to world peace, and that is absolutely unacceptable, and probably the worst decision of any man in the entire universe. Entire history of the world, that's got to be in the top 5. It's probably number 1 in my opinion. So, besides that, because of his military, the way he approached the military, this has led to a precedent of overspending on the military and cutting to social programs, like we've seen before. You know, Reagan absolutely hates social programs, but shooting lasers from satellites out of the sky, dude, hell yeah. So, anyways, the reason why the United States spends so much money on the defense budget, and why the United States military can never pass audits, and all of our taxpayer money goes to drone striking people in the Middle East and occupying Gaza, and, you know, all that shit, because Ronald Reagan, he set the precedent for all of this. We have him to thank for all of this. So, yeah, it's not great. So I think it's about time we wrap this up and give a nice, neat little conclusion as to why Ronald Reagan is the worst president of all time. Alrighty, class, what did we learn today? I know. We learned that Ronald Reagan is one of the worst presidents of all time. He left a legacy of economic disparity, racial injustice, and government overreach that continues to shape the United States today. The expansion of mass incarceration, failure of nuclear disarmament, his policies benefited the wealthy and powerful at the expense of the working class. Aggressive military spending coupled with economic policies that widen the wealth gap, this all sets the stage for decades of inequality rather than the hero of American conservatism he's known as. Reagan's true legacy is one of systemic failure and long-term harm. In short, Ronald Reagan is a terrible person, and I'm gonna leave you with 4 words. I'm glad Reagan's dead. Alright, all jokes aside, in all seriousness, if you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much for listening. I'm sorry, it probably sounds just like I'm ranting and raving and I sound like an absolute crazy person that has a weird vendetta against Ronald Reagan, and you'd be right. Anyways, to wrap things up, I'm gonna give a shout out to a few of my friends and my brother that have helped me on this YouTube journey. There's ARocky69, that's my brother. I'm gonna link his Twitch channel in the description. He streams sometimes. He's had trouble with his internet, so we're trying to fix that. There's Munkert, who also has a YouTube channel here on YouTube. I make cameos in his videos sometimes when he lets me. He's just a good friend. Check out his videos, makes awesome gaming videos. And then there's Cookie Pasta, another good friend. Just recently started streaming. Gonna link his channel in the description below. Check him out if you're interested. We did a Marvel Rival stream the other day. It was pretty fun. And until next time, guys, this has been Dongle. Hopefully you learned something new. Anyways, see ya.